So good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, everyone. My name is Corby Eason. Work here at the Utah State Board of Education. We'll start in about 5 minutes. I'm running upstairs to get a computer so I can fill questions and comments for this webinar. We really, my colleague Holly Bell, she will be joining me today as we go through this webinar talking about the Kognito Speak In, Speak Up simulation that you participated in before this webinar. And then we'll go over some best practices, terminology, statistics, and what you can do to protect students that fall in the group of LGBTQ. And so if you give me about 5 minutes to get our computer, because we want this webinar to be more interactive. We're going to pose a lot of questions, and we want back and forth interaction to make it, to cater it to your needs. And so we'll start in about 5 minutes. And also we'll be able to give other people time to get logged in so they can be part of this discussion as we go through our PowerPoint.
Are you logged onto the WebEx?
I'm not.
You get some like weird feedback somewhere.
Okay.
I'll keep trying to fix it, but I'm not sure what's going on.
You either need to send me the
So one of the things we want to do when we pose a question, if you can type it in the chat box and mute your mic, so we don't have feedback. Because I know some of y'all are in your office, and so we want to minimize the feedback. And so when we pose a question, if you can type it in the chat box, that would be greatly appreciated. But again, we would like this to be more as a discussion back and forth. We're gonna go over a few some slides, but we're gonna pose a lot of questions. And
is it your account?
it's just your regular mail.
Okay. Introduce myself. My name is Holly Bell. I'm the Equity and Advocacy Specialist, and one of my jobs is to provide support and answer questions about civil rights law. And in this particular case, Title IX, which is discrimination based on sex, and LGBTQ students fall under these protections. So I'm going to be the one filling or monitoring your comments.
Yeah. So yeah, let's get started.
But I'm not logged in yet, so if you have comments, I don't know why this is not pulling up. So,
working in interstate board education, students work with specialists. And one of my responsibilities is bullying prevention. And so, a little backstory. As I was looking at my responsibility, and I'm looking at one of the most at-risk population. One of the most at-risk population is the LGBTQ population when it comes to bullying. And so, as a special, like, okay, what can some type of support I can give to schools right away? And this is just one of many that is coming soon this year. And though I stumbled across Kognito Step In and Speak Up simulation. And the simulation was very quick. For some people, it was new information, some that you already know, like school counselors and people that uh, work with students when they come to very sensitive conversations, but some may be new. And I just wanted to pilot this program and see if this would be more beneficial for teacher, counselor, administrator, and who. But to understand the reason why I chose this, it is part of R27, Utah Administrator Rule R277613 when it comes to bullying, hazing, retaliation, and abusive conduct. And one of the training requirements in the bullying policy, in the bullying rule, is we need to see training on groups that are protected from discrimination under Title VI. And in particular, this subject will be based on Title IX, discrimination based off sex. And so, based off sex and based off people interpret sex in a different way. People maybe interpret sex as male versus female. The old presidency administration, they explicitly define that includes sexual orientation, gender identity, to make sure that we are on the same page with the federal law and the interpretation of discrimination based off sex. In the bullying rule R277613-4, we reference the Title IX law, but also within the next section, we explicitly written out the language. This includes student and employee actual or perceived characteristic based off race, national origin, sex, disability, religion, gender identity, and sexual orientation, or any other conforming or fail to conform with stereotypes. And so we just want to make sure we explicitly state that there is no bullying or hazing or cyberbullying based for any reason. And so we just want to make sure that every student feels safe, and it explicitly states that. And so this is what led to, again, sending out this professional based development called Need to Step In and Speak Up. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to turn the time over to Holly to talk about terminology.
well, and the simulation did a good job defining LGBTQ. So really, I just want to make sure you don't have any questions, or if you have questions, want clarification on any of these definitions.
Okay.
So I'm not seeing any questions.
And again, we want to make sure that definitions are always important. We always want to make sure people are on the same page and understand the different. and it's one awareness piece, but also being able to validate the student on how they identify. Yeah.
Well, and I think there's sometimes confusion on gender identity and sexual orientation, and they're very distinct. So when we speak about a transgender person, a lot of the time there's confusion on their sexual orientation, or they get commingled. And so really gender identity is in the head. It's how a person perceives themselves or feel the gender that they connect with, that develops their identity. So it has nothing to do with their sexual orientation. It has to do with the way they identify by gender. And sometimes that can get a little tricky because you'll have a gender fluid person who doesn't identify as perhaps male or female, or they it will vacillate for them. So perhaps one day they feel more identify as female, another day more as male. So that one can get a little bit tricky when we're talking about gender identity.
Okay, awesome. So now we're going to move on. We're going to talk about some statistics. I always like to give out the facts, the hard numbers. I'm big in data. And so 40% of lesbian, gay, bisexual high school students have seriously considered suicide in last year, and 29% have attempted suicide in past year. Again, I wish these are national data. I wish we had more Utah data, but the most recent Utah data we had is from the Utah CDC report back in 2017. Of the 40 cases, 6 was identified as sexual minority. And so that's something that we have based off our recent suicide data when a student died by suicide within the last couple of years. And you can review that CDC report that was put out by the CDC for just Utah-specific data. And so I just wanted to point that out, that we have we have data, but it's very limited when we talk about other things. Like, for example, LGBT students are 50% more likely to report feeling not very safe or not safe at all at school. Again, this is national data based off other school climate data or other data to collect the safety of our students. Again, we don't ask those questions to identify students that are LGBTQ, but it would be good to know some Utah-specific data, and it'll be nice to start having those conversations in our state, because as a prevention specialist dealing with bullying, I would like to be able to make evidence-based, database decision on how safe that our students feel. Is there, especially with those at-risk groups, when we talk about the civil rights, the federal protected groups like race, religion, sexual orientation, sex, it'd be nice to see how that group feel when it comes to safety. And at a statewide instrument, being able to assess that data, we don't have it. But then again, like, we can't accurately say how safe our students are feeling. I mean, we can have a general knowledge as a general population, but when it comes to the most at-risk group, we don't have any clue. But one thing the CDC saw that one of the significant risk factors for suicidal ideation is a kid being bullied. And one of the things that was fascinating, students are more likely to be bullied, especially when they are perceived to be lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer. And so they are more likely to be bullied just off perception, and not necessarily actual confirmed sexual identification. It's just a perception of being perceived that way. And so if we have a male student that is seen as feminine, very feminine, they're more likely to be bullied based off that perception. And then the last one, naturally, 1 in 5 students rarely or never intervene when they hear homophobic remarks. Like for example, if a student doing anything, they say that is gay, and I just wondering, like, what do people do when that occurs? Do we ignore it? Do we intervene? Do we address it right then and there? And so that's the question that I like to pose to the group. When you hear a homophobic remark, say in a meeting or in a classroom, how do you intervene or how do you address the issue? And so I like to pose that question. And again, there is no right or wrong answer. We would just like feedback, some things that worked for you, some things that didn't go as well, and some things that you have learned based off intervening in a situation like that.
Well, and Corby brings up a point that it's not only homophobic remarks that you'll hear in the classroom, but you might also hear them amongst your colleagues, your professional peers, and is that important to address with them? So this is your opportunity to share with us some ideas and share with others that are online. Perhaps they can benefit from your insight, maybe experiences that you've had and how you've responded.
I know it's take a little bit to unwell. So how about I pose another question? Sorry, like I'm a guy, like I like jumping in head first. I like jumping in the deep end of the water. But how about this? What I want you to do, I want you to, based off this school year, I want you to type in, how often did you hear an anti-LGBT language in your, like, either in your district office or in the classroom, or you receive a complaint about it? So just type in the number of incidents that you heard anti-LGBTQ language by a staff member or a student. So just type in a number.
So 5 per week. Wow.
Again, this is not saying you're a bad school. I'm just curious about the prevalence of this occurring within.
Okay, and then someone has examples of the previous question. Fairly rarely. And we'll come back to you, Justine.
Okay.
And you don't have to estimate a number. You can say a lot, rarely, 2. Not personally heard, but it's been reported about 5 times this semester. And 1 was 2 days ago.
Okay. Okay. Awesome.
So let's go back to Justine.
Okay.
And let her speak to her example.
Yes. So Justine, you usually kind of talk to the group about the.
And Stacy hears them often in the hall, lunchroom.
Okay.
Well, and that's an interesting point, because we don't always hear them in the classroom. So how are we intervening? And I do want to hear Justine's particular comments, but that's something to think about, is how do we intervene in spaces where it's not, where we don't have much control of the environment. Okay, so this is a counselor who is, how she's addressing, such as how is that a gay question. She doesn't want to embarrass students, but wants them to do something to think about what they are saying and why. And that's a good point, because none of us want to be called out on what we say, especially since it might just be a lack of awareness. And I think I think most of the time that's the case. If we hear those remarks, is it something that we are used to hearing? It's just a normal phrase that we've heard. As you know, throughout our lives, I think we're socialized to not see what those words mean, and so nobody likes to be called out. So how do we do that? How do we address that?
I know one thing when I do training across the state when I deal with behavior or anything. One thing we control, and I always start with it. What can we control? One thing we can control the environment of control the environment of the school, control the environment of the classroom, and also putting safeguards in place to control the environment. I always go back to PBIS, positive behavior intervention supports. Explicitly uh, explicitly stating the behavior expectations, like clearly defining those, um, having reinforcing those behavior when it comes to speaking to people calmly and being able to have those safeguards in place on addressing any bad comment. And so that is key to having those expectations posted in the classroom, in the hall, in the bathroom, and other places that you are seeing how frequently remarks that are um, anti-LGBTQ.
And that's a proactive way. And I think what Marissa, and hopefully I'm saying your name right, is saying is that she's asking them the question. So if they say that's so gay, you're asking them, well, what do you mean by that? When you say that's so gay, will you please let me know what you're saying, because I'm hearing this a different way. What do you mean by that? And that's a great way to handle the situation, because then they think to themselves, oh, hopefully they think, I guess this is what I mean, and I guess it could mean something else. So that is a great way to handle that situation. And then it helps us have a conversation. Exactly. And then we can address why it's inappropriate and hurtful. I think that's an excellent way to handle a situation like that.
Awesome. And so the question I pose, um, do our teachers, do they feel like they need help addressing this, or they refer it to counselors, or they refer it to administrators? What are some things based off their interaction that they need support in this area? Like, what type of support do you feel like the teachers need in intervening when they hear a anti-LGBTQ language?
So Corey's concern is that teachers don't know how to address it and don't know to ask for help, and that is a very good point. It can be uncomfortable for any educator, and even those who are knowledgeable about addressing it. It can be intimidating and uncomfortable, and so that's a genuine concern. So how do we educate teachers? How do we so start with administration and districts to help create the environment. As an LGBT, so her room is, or actually Christopher. So this person, Christopher's room is a safe space, but don't feel the school as a whole is. And so that makes sense if you start with administration, because when you're talking about school climate, that is definitely where it could and should start to help create that safe environment. So how do we educate teachers, administrators, how to respond? What are some ways that we can do that? And Justine, you never spoke out. I don't want to lose you and your insight.
Awesome. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna move forward.
Well, they didn't
Oh,
let them answer the
oh,
question.
sorry.
So how can we do that? I mean, starting with administration, how can they take action?
I think in my eyes, we can start off with policies. We can look at the bullying policies, and we can have that meaningful conversation with our administrator or district person. Like, this is what the policy said we have to do. Um, then, okay, what are the action steps to reaching the goal that all kids feel safe and we are creating a more inclusive school environment?
Okay, so Corey says that you can all see each other's names, correct, in comments? I don't want to. Okay, they can see it.
Okay.
Okay, so that they've been almost trained not to discuss anything regarding sex, sexual orientation, etc., because we fear repercussions. And I think having a curriculum or materials to help is wonderful. So let me respond to this. I don't know if you're all aware that the health standards are being rewritten, and right now they're in, yes, and I'll address that, Christopher. So they're being rewritten and they're in public comment period. So there's a survey that you can respond to online, and maybe we can send out that link to the survey where you can voice some of these concerns. And what Christopher is saying is that the no promo homo law was, so no promo homo means that we can't address those questions that students have in the classrooms, and in particular in the health curriculum that often takes place. And that was revoked so that you can respond to those questions in the classroom. So there are not repercussions by responding to those. Now, it doesn't mean that that you are. It doesn't mean that it's not a little bit scary still to address those questions that come up. So even when that law was revoked, where essentially that means promoting homosexuality, it can still be difficult. So with those health standards, what can be done, regardless of how they're written, we can also provide resources to teachers. I'll be presenting at the Health and Physical Educator Conference on February 5th, specifically on these issues and how teachers can address the LGBTQ issues that come up in their classrooms. If any of you are health teachers, hopefully you can attend. So that's something I'm trying to educate, is how we can address that in our curriculum to create an environment where students can feel comfortable asking those questions, or teachers can feel comfortable addressing it. And so let me go up a minute. So designating more safe spaces in the school would also be helpful. I think LGBTQ students sometimes feel that the designated safe spaces are truly the only place they can go to feel safe. And there are only a handful in my school. And that is, I mean, certainly what a way that we can do that. Well, let me ask you. Okay, and then Christopher, we'll get to that. So let me ask you, well, actually, let me say this. So, but it's response to questions. So what if the question never comes up? Is there still no state training on how to address it? And that's one thing, that's what I will be talking about, part of it in the Health Educators Conference. But, that's one conference. So I need to, and the rest of us who are aware of these issues need to educate others. So you have a responsibility understanding these issues, on talking to, and I'm just going to challenge you in saying you have a responsibility, or you have an opportunity, let's say it that way. You have an opportunity to educate your peers, your administrators on the importance of this, the prevalence of the issues, the feeling of a lack of safety for students, especially if it's in your school and you see it. If you don't bring it up, then it won't get addressed. And so you have the opportunity to do that. So the more of us who are bringing these things up, bringing it to others' attention and giving resources, the better. That's the only way we'll see change. But what are some of the ways that these safe spaces are created? And this was brought up in the Kognito program. And also along with this, creating the safe spaces, what if these things don't come up? Because I think they're related. Oh, and state training.
We are.
I'm going to go back to that too. But,
we are.
Okay, so if we're in a classroom, if I were in a classroom teacher right now, I would start on day one addressing it. It would go along with the class norms. Perfect. And that is one thing that that this program brought up. So we set our norms. I won't accept discrimination in my classroom, and that we treat each other fairly of all, you know, and we are accepting and respectful of all our uniqueness in our classroom. I don't know if specifically you say sexual orientation. That's a tricky one.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that for any, again, reason, like perception or actual characteristics, like we don't want to discriminate based off that. And again, you just addressing it beginning of the year, both in your classroom and staff meeting and having that conversation, that we have to be an example. Kids watch adults, adults watch kids. I mean, we are an example to each other, and we just got to set that role, be a role model, and be an advocate when addressing these taboos topics in our state of Utah. And so
There's Justine. Yay. Corey and I are responsible for a group of 14 paraeducators. We had to create this as part of our norms. Great. Well, and that's the thing where we're coming back to Corby as far as looking at our policies. If you have in your policies that you will not discriminate based on all of the classes, including sexual orientation, then it's important to point out those policies. And as far as best practices for supporting LGBTQ students, enumerating sexual orientation in your policies is best practices. So that's something you can do if you're looking at your policies. Really look at your policies and point that out, that might be worth considering, expanding those policies to include sexual orientation. So to Amanda, no discrimination based on race, gender, sexual orientation. Let me go back a little bit because we're missing some things, and these are really important comments. If you are adding something to your syllabus or class expectations, you can write it in, as many organizations do, something to the effect of, okay, yes, and that's where no discrimination. That's perfect. Just put it in your syllabus. Just set the stage right at the beginning. And Heidi says, I would say to my students, we are all human beings, and even though we may have many differences in the end, we are still human beings, and because of that, we need to be treating everyone with caring and respect. Beautiful. And I really don't want to forget to tell you about state trainings that we're doing. So this is one. So I'll be at the Health Educator Conference. I've been doing these presentations at the summer conference for counselors. And also we will be presenting, we have Caitlin Ryan coming out on April 24th. And so save this date for her to come and do the Family Acceptance Project. She's doing a whole workshop on that, and everyone will be invited to come to that. And also Corby and I are working with the Welcoming Schools program. I don't know if you're aware of that, but there's curriculum online that's free, actually, you can access, but also it's all about helping schools create an inclusive environment, elementary schools. So those are the things that we have coming up that we're doing, and I really appreciate any And I'm addressing LGBTQ issues in all of my Title IX trainings because that's so big on understanding discrimination based in Title IX and LGBTQ students. So please, any requests you have for training, I really appreciate you helping me to understand how I can get this information out, how Corby and I can get this information out. Because we are recognizing how important it is. And you can help us do that at the local level because I'm sure you know that we can start up here at our office, but really getting that information down all the way to the classroom is not always easy to do. So, but please utilize us as a resource.
Yeah.
Okay.
I got one more question, one more statement before we move on. One of the things I want you to think about, next time like a bullying, cyberbullying, hazing or incident occur, or any incident that come to like being harassed or being teased or whatever, so often when an incident like that occur, we address the behavior, we address the bullying, but we don't think about, is it a violation of Title VI? Is it a violation of Title IX? Is it a violation of disability? And so I just want you to think, like, just keep in mind, okay, calls on those protection, get your Title IX specialist involved in the situation, because we don't want you to be liable or parents to threaten lawsuits based off not addressing the Office of Civil Rights requirements.
Okay, we're going to go to Christopher's question, but to what Corby is saying, every LEA is required by law to assign a Title IX coordinator and a Section 504 coordinator. And there are processes as far as investigation procedures when an incident like this occurs. And so it really is best practice to have the administrator of the LEA or if the school go be in contact with the district or the LEA Title IX coordinator. In charters, it's very small, so so the administrator might be the Title IX coordinator, but it's very important to keep an eye for that additional layer on top of bullying. So, so Christopher's saying a great need and needed. Okay, as far as state training, I think that's Christopher saying. But how do we create a safe space for our students and those teachers who are LGBT without outing ourselves to our students? Being an LGBT teacher in parts of the state is still not fully accepted. I know for me, I am out to my fellow teachers, but to students and parents, I am not. I do not want to be seen as the gay teacher. I am recruiting students, so what do I do as I am in a rural part of the state? That is very challenging. And I think just as a heterosexual or any heterosexual person, you know, we don't talk about our sexuality. And so it's not something that we necessarily bring up in our classroom. I think, but I don't think that, oh man, that's so hard to navigate.
We would like to have a more detailed conversation with you later and be able to help support you in the way we can. And so we're not discrediting your comment. It's a great comment, but we'd like to have that conversation with you and be able to support you and meet your needs to where you are and help support you.
I would, or Christopher, I would love for you to give me a call. I think that these are things that are important to address in general, but I'd also love to talk to you. And so I'll give all of you my contact information as well. But they've heard many teachers talk about sexual orientation because they are hetero. Oh yeah, dates, boyfriend. So that's something that they're not necessarily, okay. Yeah, and this is the thing, when they say, I was out with my husband, or I was out with my boyfriend, and that's a normal thing to say, right? And then if you're gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, if you're saying I was out, you're female and I was going out with my girlfriend, then you feel nervous because you're outing yourself. So we're really getting into the weeds with this. And so maybe we can, but we should probably move on with what we've got, but I really do want to address these.
And then maybe,
because we're really getting into the deep issues and we want to do that. And so,
yeah, maybe we can come back in
Yeah.
another webinar or presentation to address those deeper issues. Because I think it's very important, and we want to create a safe environment both for employees and students. And so, based off what we're getting, we will do some more of these and be able to address deeper issue. And I can send the invite to this group.
well, Christopher's saying if we can't talk about it, how can we help our students? Well, as a lesbian, I'm very hesitant to talk to my kids about my personal life. And you know, how personal you get. I don't think you should hide who you are. If you want to say, for instance, for Corey as a lesbian, and I'm not going to assume woman or man because, so as lesbian, say if you have a girlfriend, you have a wife, that, like you say, if there's a heterosexual person wouldn't hesitate to say that, so don't hesitate. Because if a student were to say to you, you're female, but you have a wife, you say yes. Normalize it. So if you're comfortable doing that, then normalize it. And yeah, it goes back to the state and the environment we're in. This is what Christopher's saying. So you know where you are, but it would be nice to have the state's support better. And it would be, and that's a process, right? And the example with the no promo being revoked is a step in the right direction as far as allowing that environment to be safe. But that's a process. And it's really a personal navigation when you are identifying as LGBTQ. And especially, you know, you're looking at your area, where are you safe? And if you're, as a teacher, not feeling safe, then that helps you understand your students not feeling safe. So, and like Marissa's saying, I think students naturally feel what areas and classes are safe, and if we normalize it by being ourselves in our classrooms or areas. If you portray a feeling of insecurity as an LGBT, as identifying that along or with your students, they're going to sense that insecurity, and they're going to sense that intimidation about being open about it, especially if they identify that way. You would be a hero and an example by showing them, I am comfortable being who I am, and you are safe here to be who you are, and I am not going to talk about my sexual orientation per se, but I'm going to say that I have a wife, I have a girlfriend. I'm going to have a picture, or I have a, you know, whatever. I have a picture of my family here, and it is non-traditional. And so be a hero, be brave. I encourage you to do that.
And one thing I want to remind you of too, I want you to look at the abusive conduct policy. And that's very important. That's very critical of updating and amending the bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation policy, is adding that abusive conduct.
Those protections.
Yeah.
And those protections for yourself and your students.
Yeah, abusive conduct is like a parent or student can make you feel X, Y, Z. You have to look up, I don't have the policy right in my face, look up how you can feel. Then also abusive conduct go to employee versus an employee. And so you are protected, both employee and parents or student towards an employee. And so that's one of the big steps of making sure that everyone feels protected, everyone feels safe. And so just a reminder, abusive conduct is fairly new to this bullying policy, but abusive conduct is for school and employees to feel safe. And so I just want you to make sure you remember that.
Okay, we're gonna get another tricky thing. Let's see here. School should be a safe place for teachers too. Exactly. Policy, administration, other staff need to be willing to back a teacher up. Some parents may have fears, but as they have positive experiences with LGBTQ teachers, things will change. I know it must be difficult. You are forging new roads in our state. Very, very good words. It is difficult. I do see things changing. It will take time, but it will take people who are allies and people who identify as LGBTQ to make those changes. So I'm going to talk about something else that's really tricky, especially being the Title IX coordinator. I get a lot of questions on this. And that is, well, first of all, are we on? Yeah, so not assuming a trans person's sexuality. First of all, we may not know that someone is transgender unless they tell us. So someone's gender expression might not align with their gender identity. So we see our tomboyish girls. We see our, at sometimes our boys that maybe appear more feminine or metrosexual or however they're presenting themselves. So we cannot assume that they're transgender. And I don't recommend asking. So if they want to tell you, then fine. Okay, so bathrooms and locker rooms is what those are the ones that are tricky, and also using preferred names and pronouns. So bathrooms and locker rooms, as far as the court cases that have come forward, because under the current administration, the Office for Civil Rights had a Dear Colleague letter that went out with best practices for transgender students. And these 3 points, as far as locker rooms, bathrooms, preferred names and pronouns, the recommendations from the Office for Civil Rights were to allow them to use their preferred names, pronouns, and respect that, and the locker rooms and that are more comfortable. So the court cases that came out where students who were transgender and wanted to use their preferred bathroom and as far as the locker room, they ruled in favor of the transgender students, that they should use they should be allowed to use the restroom or locker room where they're most comfortable. So the way that looks in schools, it's hard to handle it. Best practices and policies are to allow them to use their preferred bathroom, and there's safety concerns both ways that people have expressed. But what I always use the example of if I'm doing a training and I have someone who identifies as their biological sex, so they are identifying as their biological sex, and I ask them this question, and this is something that you can do to help people understand and have empathy. I tell them that they are only allowed to use the opposite gender bathroom for a week, let's say, and what would they do? And it gives you a feeling very awkward, like myself, when I accidentally go into a men's restroom, I freak out and I run out, right? Because that's very uncomfortable. So if you're a transgender person, especially if your gender expression matches your gender identity, and you're forced to go into the other person's restroom, or perhaps forced to use a restroom that's off from other students, that can be very uncomfortable. And so a lot of the time, like the simulation said, they won't drink water. They can get urinary tract infections. It can create a lot of anxiety and stress as far as their mental well-being in an unsafe environment for them. And so looking at the policies and just asking, okay, what is the safest environment? If you're saying that it's unsafe for a transgender student to, if students know that they are transgender and they go into the bathroom of their preferred, their preferred bathroom, and you're worried about them being bullied in the bathroom, then you just need to create some safe measures for all students to be safe in the bathroom. And so this can get very complicated, but you need to think of things, I think, from the perspective of a transgender student and work with them on, I mean, really it's a matter of having those conversations. So as a counselor, when I'd have those conversations with those students, what can you do if you're feeling unsafe using your preferred restroom? What can we do to help you to navigate this environment and this, you know, and how would you feel the most safe? So it's really about having those conversations with them and with your administration on how to, you know, what would be most comfortable for that student. That would be my recommendation. There really are no laws when we're looking at how the Office for Civil Rights would handle these types of situations. Oftentimes you want to look at what are, what's the case law, you know, what are the court cases coming out with, because we don't have definitive guidance from the Office for Civil Rights because that Dear Colleague letter was pulled. And so, but the guidance is there. The best practices are there. You can look up how to support transgender students from the Office for Civil Rights. Okay. And then this is and so we have a comment on this. And then there's also issues with preferred gender pronouns that I should probably address. So Amanda is saying, I feel like I'm constantly fighting. So we haven't, oh, hang on a second. Okay, so I feel like I'm constantly fighting this battle at my school. Bathroom use preferred names and pronouns. And I often get the answer, there's no state law, so we're not going to create a policy at this point. What does the state of Utah have in place to protect schools who want to follow best practices but may come under fire with parents? So we don't have, every district can have their policy, and I've seen some policies out there that are addressing these. One example is Sevier School District, and you can look up their policy and perhaps share that and have these conversations with your administration. And there's a lot of local control. So a lot of in our state as far as how districts want to handle and create their own policies. And it really is important for them to have policies. And so, because that's where it begins. As far as coming under fire with parents, parents are going to come, they're going, you know, this is a particularly sensitive issue. You got to have administration backing you up. And it's a matter of educating those parents and saying, well, here's, you know, if you've got these stats to back you up, you've got these stats as far as suicide rates of LGBT students, and just in general, the bullying that happens. And so I don't necessarily have a projection into the future as far as state laws and policies, but districts and LEAs can have their own policies, and that would be something to back you up with parents. They're going to complain about lots of things. It doesn't mean you don't stand up and have those conversations with them. And as far as what is, the bottom line is protecting your students and trying to help parents understand. But don't be afraid of dissent. This is how conversations start. This is how conversations happen, and how we make progress. So don't expect that there's going to be everyone's going to be positive on board. That doesn't happen with any change that is sensitive. It just Okay. I will look at Sevier's policies. Thanks. I definitely recommend that. I use them as an example on any training, Title IX training I do. And then how do you explain to other students that it's okay for student X, who is physically a girl, to use the women's bathroom, but we need to call them a he? Okay. This is confusing with the other students as the cause of bullying when they use the wrong pronouns. Okay, we're really getting...
and so, again...
I love this conversation, though. This is great. This is what you're dealing with.
And we have to, again, have these meaningful conversations with our district leadership, and then be able to have those meaningful conversations with administration. Then also, based off decision of your local board on how to address those. Then one of the things, too, when we touching a sensitive topic, the most important thing is meeting people where they are, and get them the information, and slowly, one defeat at a time, we can get things to change. Something like this is not going to change overnight. It's just that one step towards making it, creating a safe environment. And I always can think of a situation based off a group that I am. I'm a Black African American in Utah, and um, it feels different. But I think about how long it took Dr. Martin Luther King. We celebrate his day, holiday on Monday. But how long did it take for him to make that change? It took slowly change. I mean, small defeats at a time. How do you eat an elephant? That's one question my English teacher posed to me.
I'm vegetarian.
How do I eat an elephant?
I don't.
One bite at a time. And so one defeat, one situation at a time, one incident at a time, that we can have these conversations. And these conversations are hard. And one of the things, too, that I'm thinking about is doing a presentation on how to have difficult conversations and be able to help um, um, help you feel encouraged, help you have validation to address these sensitive conversations that we need to have to keep our students, all our students, safe and create an inclusive environment for all students.
Well, and Christopher says, who do we make safe? Well, we need to make everyone safe, for sure. Yes, all students need to be made to feel safe. And hearing that they're bullying when they use the information they have is confusing. It is. It's all confusing. So just remember there are certain protections there under race, ethnicity, national origin, gender, and disability, because that there are higher incidents of bullying under those protected classes. But it doesn't discredit that everyone needs to feel safe, and really it's about everyone needs to be aware. And I always recommend to students who do identify as LGBTQ to try to, so if other students or teachers use the gender, the pronoun that they don't prefer, that it's really not intentional. They also need to be tolerant on their end, that they understand. I mean, and I'm not saying in all cases it's not intentional, but in a lot of it is awareness for LGBTQ students to understand that that is confusing, and not take offense to it. And there are ways that we can get around as far as the gender pronoun issue. I think it's good to respect it, to respect their name and preferred gender. I mean, you do the same for any heterosexual student. If they say, my name's Mary, but I prefer to go by, my name's Christopher, I prefer to go by Chris, or my name is, that kind of thing. And so you do that for any other student. And there are districts who are allowing students to change their preferred gender, their gender pronoun and preferred name on their records, not their official records, because Utah law doesn't allow them to do that. But they are able to do that within their student information systems, so that they're not outing kids when they have on the roll. That, especially if a substitute comes in, or that they don't want to out kids just by using what's on the roll. So who do you suggest having those conversations? As a teacher, I feel like it's out of my realm, and I worry about repercussions, and that is a concern. And that's the thing. These are really important conversations. They really are.
I can address those conversations with district leaderships and start having conversations about bullying policy. And one of the things too, I would like to say too, so often parents, student, community members throw the term off bullying, but if you go back to the definition of bullying, if it doesn't meet those requirements, it's not bullying. It may be teasing. I mean, it may be, like how they say, a lack of information, and stuff. And so we have to be careful with throwing a term out bullying, because it may not necessarily be bullying. It may be something else. And we have a specific definition for bullying. And I always want you to refer back to policy so you can be consistent, that everyone in your school community know the definition of bullying, know the definition of cyberbullying, because a lot of stuff that is labeled as bullying, it actually is assault or sexual harassment or disruptive student behavior. And so we have to be able to educate everyone of what is bullying, what is conflict, what is teasing, what is mean, what is rude, because I think they are very different, but we always say it's bullying. And and my biggest thing is we got to educate everyone to be consistent and being able to say if something offended, speak up, because I'm gonna use an example again based off my personal experience. Um, when people say the term African American, I'm like, a white person would be a white African American. Like, I mean, and so I prefer just tell me I'm black. Like, I'm totally cool with that. But I can't speak for every black person, and so I always view stuff when people say something that I may not disagree with or disagree with. I view it as a teaching moment and being able to educate and give them experience how I feel about a certain comment or a certain question and things. And so again, we can't assume that every LGBTQ didn't feel one way about a certain word. It's one of those things. It's a teaching moment, and we got to teach people to be able to speak up when they feel uncomfortable. Some way, either it's safety or some way that that you can feel validated and you can get it off your chest.
Well, I think what Christopher's saying is when you're worried about your job, because you're like, who do you talk to? Because, you know, you don't want to lose your job, or that might be one of the repercussions that you're feeling, could happen. And so it could be anonymously. I'm seeing these issues happening in my school. It could be actually adults can use the SafeUT app and it will go back to the school. So if you have the SafeUT app, it is something that you can use anonymously, concerned specifically to your school. That will go to your administration. So it's anonymous. So that's maybe part of it. And if you're talking about policies and that, you know, challenging policies can be very confusing. And so it's kind of like when you talk to your students about how do you voice your opinions, how do you voice your concerns, what would you say to them? Because I think that they can feel in a position of powerlessness, often like a teacher would. And so we would tell them, okay, who's the person you would feel comfortable talking to that could take this to perhaps administration? Can you do it anonymously? That kind of thing. And I don't know if that helps, but that can be very scary to feel like your job is done, especially if you yourself identify as LGBTQ and it's well known. That can be really uncomfortable and worrisome for you, and I get that.
Yeah. And another thing I want to remind you of, there is in statute that retaliation, no one can retaliate. And so I just want to again remind you of the policies that are in place. Again, my phone, my personally myself, and I'm sure Holly, I can speak for Holly too, that please give us a call if you have a question or concern and you want stuff addressed. I have hard conversation with everyone, so I don't mind.
Well, we are a resource because
Yes.
if you contact us and you say, I'm seeing these things in my school, we can contact, we would typically contact your Title IX coordinator and say, here's some concerns I'm receiving. It can be totally anonymous. And then we can let them know what best practices are, and help. So that's a really good point. You contact us because this is one of the things that we do all the time, is to contact LEAs and say, here are some observations that we're getting. And we're not here to be enforcers. We're here to help provide information. So along with state trainings, we also can make individual phone calls and voice concerns to regarding individual schools or districts.
Yeah.
So I think that we kind of covered this next slide as far as.
Yeah, one thing too, based off the next slide, I always say when we address things, just be consistent. That's the most important thing. Be consistent. Because we can't let it slide one time and be able to force it next time. We just got to be very consistent. And one thing I wanted you to think about, if we don't address it and we ignore it, the person that getting harassed or teased, they may perceive it that you are okay with that type of behavior. And so we just want to be consistent that we don't tolerate any discrimination, any hard will, any comments that affects people negatively. And so we just gotta be consistent and that.
Well, and some of the things sometimes I've seen, if you're an example of other students, then they actually will, they might take action with their peers, where they'll say, hey, this is not okay what you're saying to this other. So the whole bystander thing, you'll help empower them to know how to respond to other students. So that's something that you can hopefully utilize is other students' ability to advocate for, and I think you know who those students are that will be allies and help educate them. And I don't know if you have GSAs. That is another support, and there's research to back that up, that it's a good support for and help building that positive, inclusive school environment if you have GSAs. That's a club.
So some people don't know what GSA. I know what it is, but
yeah.
So what is GSA?
It used to be gay, lesbian. Let's see, GSA, Gay Straight Alliance.
Yeah.
Now it's gender. I can't remember. Because it's recently more changed.
And we can send out resources.
I'm gonna have to look it up. Can you remember? It's on the tip of my tongue. Okay, I'm going to look it up. But so that is a club that a school can have, and yes, it's legal. No, they have a right to have this club, and it can help. So you've got those allies that you're educating within that community, that they can help understand how to be advocates in the school. Is it on here? Yay! Gender and Sexualities Alliance. Okay. Okay.
Awesome.
So let's see. We've talked about, okay, so gender neutral language. So, and this is something when I'm going to talk about health education, a lot of times they'll use, they'll have students have conversations with each other. And so when we're giving scenarios, or we're talking with our students using gender neutral language, especially, like when you're talking about dating, you're not saying male, female, girlfriend, boyfriend, as far as that being the only, and using they instead of he and she. They can be used singularly. You can look that up in the dictionary. Support rather than advising. So really practicing those listening skills. It can be hard to give advice to anyone because everyone's situation is very specific, and so allowing them to ask you and just providing, empathizing, and we can start getting into some FERPA issues, some privacy issues as well if we start advising, and we want to be careful with that. So I do want to talk about privacy concerns coming up, but and then referring, we've talked about that, connecting them to resources, and Corby will go over some of those resources. In fact, the next part that I was going to talk about, if you want to move on, is the FERPA laws. So there's some, and I really am trying to get people to understand that when, and so here's Utah FERPA. I've just started to go in circles, so let me just focus here. So here's Utah FERPA. So these are the topics when a student comes to you, and they can bring these up. I'm not saying that when they come into your office, that, you know, if they bring these up, that's fine. You don't necessarily shut them down, but this is where you communicate to them. I want to help you. There's a I'm just kind of going all over the place. There's a video from the data privacy in our agency that goes over, a student comes in and says, I'm having a hard time. I'm having problems at home, and the teacher's saying, really, you know, how can I help you? And she's saying, I'm a Democrat. And so the teacher's saying, because that's a political affiliation, that's on the list. And a teacher can be there, or a counselor can be there to listen and empathize, but we don't want to get into the details with them. So we do need parent permission in order to discuss the intricacies of that. And we don't want the schools to be a place for therapy either, or so we're an education environment, but we can be resources. We can help connect students to resources. But these are your taboo topics that we can't get into detail with students. But there can be confusion with sexual behavior, orientation, and attitudes as far as what we have confidentiality and what we communicate to parents. So there's a misunderstanding out there that if a student comes out to you, you have to call the parents. So that can create actually an unsafe environment for students, and you are not required to do that. So there's a lot of homelessness, especially with transgender students, because when families become aware, it can result in homelessness. It's not our job or responsibility to out students to their parents. If you have a student come into your office that says, I'm female, I have a boyfriend, you don't call the parents and say, guess what, I'm sorry to tell you this, but your child is heterosexual. So if you want to be consistent, you want to do that with every single student that comes into your office and says, this is my sexual orientation. That's even breaking confidentiality for that student. But with LGBTQ students in particular, it can create an unsafe environment for them. And please understand that it is not your responsibility to do that. And that just in expressing their orientation doesn't mean that it's a problem for them and they want to talk about it. Just like any heterosexual student would come into you and say, my boyfriend, blah. So it doesn't mean they're saying this is a problem for me that I like the opposite sex. This is saying, okay, so here's part of who I am. I also like art class, and I like, but they might want to talk to you about their sexual behavior or their orientation and say, that's when you're getting into some problems with FERPA. And those are the things that you have to get parent permission. So I hope I've made that clear. If a student comes out to you or says that I'm transgender, you do not call parents. You can help them if they're saying, I'm having a hard time talking to my parents about this. This is where you can provide them guidance and say, okay, so how can you feel comfortable talking to your parents? Is it important to them? But if they're saying they want to continue conversations about it, that's where you need to get permission on any of these topics.
So let me make it more tricky for you.
Uh-oh, we're making it tricky.
Say you got an incident as an administrator, whoever, that a kid is being bullied and it is perceived based off sexual orientation. What should I do? So by statute, you have to notify the parent that your kid is being bullied. Then you can say that it's based off the perception of race or perception of orientation. Is that out on a student? No, it's just a perception. But when you make that conversation, I mean, when you notify the parent about it, which is required by law, that's a good time to say, okay, I mean, if the parent asks you, I mean, that's something the kid have to think about. Because some parent may ask, are you? And so the kid may have to be prepared for that question. And so, but by law, we have to require that the kid is being bullied, especially if it based off certain protection, and then let let the parent know the process if it's following federal laws that this is the procedure that we're going through, and let them know your Title IX or Title IX specialist when you're dealing with that incident.
Now, we've got different people in different roles on taking or participating in the conversation. So I really would recommend that that's the administrator that's having these conversations, not the teacher, not the counselor. You can communicate communicate with your administrator if you're in one of those roles that this has been reported to me. But I think that would put you in put you in a comfortable role and compromising situation to be the one to communicate the incident and the perception. So I would say to put that would be the administrator's role.
Yeah, and it's definitely an administrator role. And one other thing too is just I personally had a situation like this and dealing, and my role at the time was a counselor. And so what me and my administrator did, based off the information I received, we made the phone call together, and we were able to let the parent know, and then we was able to address the issue. So,
any questions about that? Okay.
I always say just worst come to worst, refer back to policy and make sure you are following your policies. And so here are some resources that are available. We all know about the Safe UT app, I hope. So I would have everyone download, students, employees download the Safe UT app. You can be able to talk with a clinical crisis counselor about just about anything. And so there can be a resource that you can submit a tip about any concerns about students or employee, and they get that sent to the administration of the district and be able to address that concern. You can do it. You can say your name. You can not say your name. Whatever you feel comfortable with. And so that's a great resources. But most importantly, it's a resource to be able to talk to an individual when you feel like you as an employee or a student feel like no one else can talk to them about a situation. That's a way to do it. But I want to remind you, when it's immediate danger or threat to harm self and other, that have to get disclosed to parents. So I just want students to be reminding of that, about the confidentiality piece. Is just when it's a threat to self and others that we are required to notify parents about that. But we have the Trevor Project LGBT hotline. I mean, we got the trans hotline, the National Suicide Prevention hotline, and the crisis hotline. So these are some resources that I would have posted in the classroom. I say one of the best places to have these stuff is in the health room, because that's when you're having those conversation around sexuality. And I know people are very taboo when we see the word sex and everything here in Utah. But these...
Well, I'm not just Utah. I think conversations around sex are comfortable in a lot of arenas. But
yeah, so I'm not from
others
Utah.
have expressed.
I'm not from Utah. I'm Georgia, and my family was straight shooters. I mean, and so we talked about everything.
So in Georgia, we talked about.
And so again, this reminder of where we are, our population. We got a base decision, and then again, this is a conversation that you have with your administrator, district personnel, hey, these are some resources. Where would be the best place to post these at? And so the administration be on board, the school district be on board, and so y'all can be consistent. You can have support and backing, but these are just resources. How we post resources about everything else in our school, and so it'd be good for everyone to be on the same page, and so we won't have parents or community members pushing back, and so we can be the administration can be aware of this information, and they can say, yes, we got this to protect all students. And so,
well, I want to also connect you with some other organizations that can be a resource. And these are organizations that some of them that you can recommend to students as far as helping them when they come to you. So if you've heard of GLSEN, so they're the Gay, Lesbian, Straight Education Network. They have a lot on what policies, what student rights are, a lot of resources. In fact, in 2017, they have their National School Climate Survey from 2017 is now published, and that can be a great resource for you to look at some of the national statistics as far as bullying is concerned and student safety, feelings of safety in school. So that's a great resource for you. Also, there's the Pride Center in Salt Lake. They have free counseling for LGBTQ students, activities, gay prom. They have a lot of, they can help those students connect with resources. And Circle is also a resource. There's a Salt Lake campus opening. There's one in Provo. So it's a house where students can go to. They can they have snacks and food available to them. It's just a place where they can go to feel safe. Equality Utah is they're political activists, so they were really active in retracting the no promo homo law. So that is a resource to you. And then we'll be doing the professional development on the Family Acceptance Project, and that's something you can look. I'd recommend you look up online. They are helping families talk to their students and understand their students. So it's the Family Acceptance Project because they've done a lot of research. Caitlin Ryan's done a lot of research on accepting families and how that promotes safety for LGBTQ students and better outcomes. Because students are with highly rejecting families are 8.4 times more likely to attempt suicide or to complete suicide. So that's just a little bit of the research. It starts at 8 and 8 to 3:30, but we don't have a venue yet, so just mark that on your calendar. And she also has materials that are specific to LDS families that she's created. So she's done a lot of good research. Those are the NP Flag. That's a parent organization, and Mama Dragons. Those are parents of LGBTQ students who are doing advocacy. Those are the ones I can think of right now. But so there's a lot of resources out there, a lot of information that can help you and help your students and help their families. And then there's a Welcoming Schools curriculum. You can get that on the HRC website, and that's free, even if you don't have the program in your school. I think I've exhausted my...
So we have like 3 minutes left. Again, I feel like this, like I said, when I first came onto the job, and I feel like this is one of the areas that I feel like educators need more help in, and it's one of those sensitive areas that I know people won't speak up about it, fear of repercussions and stuff. But my goal is always, I want to make sure each student feels safe. Each school employee feels.
You can just talk through there.
Did I unmute it? I think I did.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're offline now on the WebEx, but we can, hopefully you can still hear us. If you're disconnected, that's fine. And Amanda is saying that if you have a counselor, you can start there.
Yeah.
And then we could present a united front to the principal or Title IX coordinator, and we definitely are trying to do that. And the Kognito simulation really helped. Good, and how comfortable you are. I wish we could have more people participate. So thank you.
Yeah.
We have what, 3 of you left. So.
Yeah. Awesome. And again, I think this is just a start of a meaningful conversation that we're gonna continue. And also, if you feel like your staff will benefit for this training, let me know because I still have some license available, and I would love to come down and have this discussion, like uh, face-to-face discussion, and have everyone participate in simulation beforehand, but have this face-to-face discussion as well.
And that's what we're telling Sarah, Stacy, Amanda, and David.
Awesome.
I do recommend I do recognize your name, David.
Thanks. Have a great day, and have a rest of the good day.